Hi all, welcome to the walkthrough of my week 3 notes. These are going to be available, the written version, on the week 3 questions thread under the post called My Notes. Okay, so I'm very excited this week. We're finally going to get to cover evolution. Super happy. But let's start with chapter 13. So, biology came of age on November 24th, 1859, the day Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. That's our big day. But we're going to let's go through and talk about some definitions. So, evolution means descent with modification. Fossil means traces of organisms from the past. Strata are layers of rock or sediment. Think of earthquakes and how you can see the strata exposed. Paleontology is the study of fossils. Catastrophism is events in the past that were sudden and caused by mechanisms different than the present. So there's some crazy catastrophe. Think meteor and death of dinosaurs, right? Uniformitarianism is a mechanism of change that are constant over time. So it's like a constant pressure, like maybe the amount of rain, maybe, I don't know, the waves on the beach, things like that. Adaptation are characteristics of organisms that enhance their survival and reproduction where they live. What should be of? So, characteristics of organisms that enhance their survival and reproduction where they live. So I have an adaptation of having, I don't know, being really tall, which I don't, but let's pretend. So I'm really tall and I'm better to play basketball. So if I live in a society where this is important and the only way I'm going to survive, then this is an adaptation because it helps me survive. Natural selection are good traits that make happy critters that have happy babies. So natural selection means I'm thriving in my environment and I'm having babies that are also thriving in my environment. So I need both of those, or all of that. How will C-sections change human evolution? So if C-sections allow for the brain to be bigger, the skull to be bigger, since you don't have to get through the birth canal, how might that change? Artificial selection, now that's selective breeding for traits. It's very similar, well, kind of the same as genetically modified food, except generally when we're talking about artificial selection, currently we're talking more about like dog breeds and things like that. However, GM food would also fall in there. Homology is similarity due to a common ancestor. So we all have two arms and two arms and two legs is pretty much a mammalian thing. That's because we share a common ancestor. Homologous structures, think dolphins, mammals, swimming rather than a fish. So dolphins, how do they move their butt? They go up and down, right? Fish go side to side because they have the ancestor of walking. Vestigial structures. These are remnants of features that served important functions in organisms' ancestors. Think a hymen, think an appendix. Things that still floating around but aren't doing anything, like our tailbone. You know, things that we just don't really have a use, but we haven't found them detrimental, so they have not disappeared, or maybe they're now being used in a different way. That happens a lot. Evolutionary tree. This is a diagram that reflects evolutionary relationships among groups of organisms. So it's going to say this evolved here, these broke off here. Convergent evolution is independent evolution of similar features. Think marsupial equivalents to mammals, flying snakes. So flying snake, a flying squirrel, how do they fly? They have similar structures even though they have a different past, but they live in the similar area or they're filling a similar niche. Biogeography is the geographic distribution of species. Continental drift is a movement of continents over time. Pangea was the original single continent. Endemic, we'll hear that a lot. Those are plants and animals found only in one place. And kinkajous, Joshua trees, things that, like I live in the Mojave Desert. So for me, Joshua trees are every friggin' where. But if you go somewhere else, they're nowhere because they only live in this one space. Population. So in biology, when we talk about population, it's a group of individuals that live in the same place at the same time. So day animals are in one population, night animals are in another. So I have a population of bats. I have a population of army ants. I have a population of, I don't know, mice. Something like that. Okay, let's scroll up a little bit. Evolutionary adaptation. Population gets traits over time that help it be more successful in the environment. So it's not like that your individual is getting a helpful trait, it's that that trait has spread throughout the population to make it better. So an evolutionary adaptation, maybe if you could talk about giraffes getting longer necks and that kind of thing. Let me pause this for a second. My dog is getting in trouble. Okay, and now my pit bull mix is behaving herself and not staring at the guinea pigs and hoping to eat them. So let's continue. Evolution. Evolution is the change of all creatures from beginning of time, or how certain populations change over time. Basically change over time. So evolution is how some group of critters started as one thing and ended up as the same. Sometimes these changes can seem really tiny. Like we always talk about how sharks look pretty much the same, but there's that pretty much. So they have evolved from how they looked in the past, but they're very similar, right? Well, things like, I don't know, humans have obviously, you see us changing a lot. Plus we care more about how we change because we're humans. Okay, so let's talk about some of the history of biology as a science. So Aristotle thought all living things are unchanging in form and inhabit the earth that is only about 6,000 years old, dominated the intellectual climate of the Western world for centuries. So when Aristotle was running around, we figured nobody ever changed, and the world was only 6,000 years old. And that's how everybody thought for a long time. Some people still think that way, but science has shown differently. So in the mid-1700s, the study of fossils led French naturalist Georges, it's probably a French version, but that's how we're saying it, Buffon, to suggest that the Earth might be much older than 6,000 years. He also observed similarities between particular fossils and living animals. So now we know the Earth is older, in that some of the stuff living and the stuff dead kind of looks like each other. 1766. Now we've got Buffon proposing that the certain fossil forms might be ancient versions of similar living creatures. So now we're saying that there is change. It does happen. 1800s, French naturalist Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, hey, I said that right, suggested that the best explanation for this relationship of fossils to current organism is that life evolves. So we're saying that life does evolve. Now Lamarck explained evolution as refinement of traits that equip organisms to perform successfully in their environments. So he's kind of giving evolution a goal. For example, some birds have powerful beaks that enable them to crack tough seeds. He proposed that by using or not using its body parts, an individual may develop certain traits that it passes to its offspring. Now, in current biology, there is some evidence that this might be happening for certain genes, but overall, we found that this is not accurate, right? Because evolution doesn't have a goal, and it's more of an overall version than like an individual on an individual scale. But that's like if you take a lot more intensive gene-based evolution class. This does not work with mitosis and meiosis as we understand it, but Russia bought into it for years. Yeah, for a long time the Soviet Union thought Lamarck had to be correct, and that really put them behind with biogenetics, because though this might be accurate for some very specific cases, in general we're going to have to go with Darwin's theory, because that has been found to be much more general. Okay? In 1831, Darwin goes on the HMS Beagle for a voyage around the world. It was a tour that would have a profound effect on Darwin's thinking and eventually on the thinking of the entire world. He sits on his evolution theory because he's worried about how it will change the world. So he goes on this voyage, sees a whole bunch of species, starts to make connection, but is like, oh my God, I live in a world where none of this is acceptable yet. Then, mid-1850s, Alfred Wallace, a British naturalist doing fieldwork in Indonesia, developed a theory almost identical to Darwin's. When Wallace sent Darwin a manuscript describing his own ideas of natural selection, Darwin wrote, "All my originality will be smashed." So Darwin was like, I don't know how to handle this. Alfred Wallace was this young guy going, hey, look at what I found. And he sent his work to Darwin because he was like the head of the field. That's what you do. And Darwin's like, God damn it, I don't know what to do. Luckily, In 1858, the two of Darwin's colleagues presented Wallace's papers and excerpts from Darwin's earlier essay together with to the scientific community. So they just presented both. They did Darwin's before Wallace's paper, so Darwin is known as the originator of all the ideas, and of course he did come out of it ahead of time, come up with it ahead of time, even if he didn't share it. Luckily, scientists are much more into sharing nowadays. But this allowed Darwin's argument to be heard, and it was strong because he spent years of time stressing out about how is my society going to handle this and trying to get every detail correct, right? So in 1859, The Origin of Species, Darwin presented the world with an avalanche of evidence and strong logical argument for evolution. In later years, more evolution would gather to support Darwin's theory. Of course, it has been tweaked a little bit, but in general, this is the theory that we use. These basic principles. Nice little checkpoint. So let's do the definition of fossil record. Fossil record is an ordered sequence of fossils as they appear in the rock layers or strata, marking the passage of geologic time. The fossil record reveals the appearance of organisms in a historical sequence, so stuff that croaked first is on the bottom. Generally. Now remember, sometimes with the geology, rock will end up on top of other rock or flipped over because there was an earthquake, a glacier goes by, messes stuff up. But this is, in general, the order that's found in is the order that it occurred in. Also, if it does get moved around because of earth movements, you can date the rock, which allows you to date the fossils, and you'll be able to see how stuff changed. I was somewhere that this happened. I think it was like Red Rock Canyon. If I remember, I'll post a note somewhere. It's going to drive me crazy. Comparative anatomy. Now this is where stuff looks the same on different creatures. The same skeletal elements make up the forelimbs of humans, cats, whales, bats, even though the functions of these forelimbs differ greatly. Clearly, a whale's flipper does not do the same job as a bat's wing, but we have the same basic body plan. And so we would compare, what does the arm do here, what does the arm do there, what does the shell of a turtle do, what does the shell of a crab do? You know, these things that you would look at and then see what point did they first arise and then how did they change. There's a fun evolution video on a whale. Another checkpoint, another video. I like that video, it's fun. Another checkpoint. Okay, so Darwin perceived adaptation to the environment and the origin of new species as a closely related processes. Alright, what Darwin noticed, he took three really important observations, right? First observation, traits vary within a population. So everyone doesn't have the same hair color, right? 2, traits are inherited. Like we talked about last week, if everybody's blonde, it's really unlikely that a dark-haired child is going to show up. Observation 3, all species are capable of producing, more than the environment can handle. So you think about how many kids we could have and overrun the environment, which humans are kind of doing anyways, but so we can all have tons of kids, but doesn't mean all those kids will survive. All right, so let's look at 4 observations. Forgot that one, which is what I just said. Observation 4, not all offspring survive. The inference here is that good traits lead to more children, and inference 2 is that the accumulation of good traits in a population thus evolves over time. So your good kids have more good traits. This leads to an accumulation of good traits, and that leads to the population evolving. So the individual affects the overall, but it takes until it's overall for a really big change to see. Let's pause here because I'm already at 14 minutes, and we'll pick up part 2 in the next video. I hope this helped.